Okay, welcome to the anniversary series of the Music Weekly's anniversary series, where we are celebrating our second anniversary with some extra interviews for you guys. Today, I'm here with Marisa Ewing-Moody, who's a musician, sound designer, and audio engineer. And Marisa, you're probably the most versatile person we're going to be talking to in this series because you've done pretty much everything, it seems.
Yeah, just a little bit all over the place. Lots of different fields, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Oh, that's great. Amongst your projects are a variety of films, a lot of documentaries. I find that quite interesting.
Mhm.
And you've done music videos, you've done games, you've done pods, and you have a boutique audio studio, Hemlock Creek Productions. Is that right?
Mhm.
Where you focus most of your projects from, I guess.
Yeah.
And you're also a composer.
Yes.
So, yeah, that was the official bio from your website. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself outside of that?
Yeah, sure. Like you said, I own Hemlock Creek Productions, which is a boutique audio studio, and I focus on dialogue editing, sound design, mixing, and mastering. But I've also done a lot of work outside of Hemlock Creek Productions, mostly in the music range, so recording vocals for music. And I've also done a fair amount of work on documentaries as well.
Yeah, cool. It's very versatile. And I'm intrigued to know how you work with film exactly. Do you do the sound isolated, or do you also have to work with the video, the syncing, and the.
So it depends on the type of project. Usually, what people would come to me for would be recording. So I would do a lot of like narration for the documentaries in a studio. And then, depending on the project, either I or someone else would do the mixing or mastering. And that basically entails just making sure that the narration fits well with the rest of everything that they've recorded and that all the levels are good. And then I'll also do, in the case of documentaries, especially when they're recorded outside, just making sure that there's like noise reduction. You don't hear like cars going by and people talking in the background or music and things like that. So a lot of the work that I do in film is like vocal recording and vocal cleanup.
Mm, there sounds like there is a lot of cleanup in general.
Yeah, for sure. And especially post COVID, a lot of people have been recording in home studios. So
Ah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, that's a whole new thing, I guess.
Yeah.
You have a background both with a BA in music, with a specialization in films, if I understood correctly, and a
Mhm.
BA in audio engineering. Would you
Yep.
like to let us know how did you know that you wanted to be a musician, and how did you come into the audio part of it?
So, being a musician was something that I knew I would want for a long time. I started out playing flute when I was 9. I was in elementary school and I really, really loved it. And I didn't really see it as a career option until I went to high school, where I took a music theory class. And that was the first time that I'd guess I've done composition in any like official sense. Because I used to, when I was little, I would like make up little songs all the time and I'd sing them or I'd make up songs for the flute. But in that composition class was the first time that I was like, hey, this like could actually be a solid career for me. The audio side was actually more of an accident. I originally wanted to specialize in computer science and music, so have a double major in those two. But when I went to my school and was sort of touring around, I sat in a computer science class to see if I would like it, and ran into someone that was studying audio production. And he's like, oh, you should check out, we have a studio on campus and all this stuff that I literally had no clue that there was even a recording studio on campus. And basically I walked in and was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. It was, I don't know, love at first sight is a weird expression, but basically as soon as I saw the studio, I was like, yeah, I want to learn how to use this and how to record. And yeah, just went from there.
Yeah, and have you looked back, or were you?
No, not at all. I think it was a really good choice. I do like computer science and I like to code. Sometimes I'll make like little games for fun, but I think career wise, audio production was an excellent choice.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like you're keeping busy.
Yeah, for sure.
So, how did you get where you are today? If you want to walk us through career-wise, which how you got to start your own business, and then how did you make that decision? Was this straight out of uni or
So there was about I'm trying to do math properly. It was a little over a 2 year gap between when I graduated and when I started the business. And a lot of that was freelance work. I was trying to find like a full time job in audio production, but in the area that I was at, a lot of the jobs were mostly senior positions. And since I was just starting out, just didn't really fit into those roles. So I started mostly through Twitter, just finding people that were like, hey, I've seen your work on documentaries. Do you think you could help edit, sound for this film? And I did like a lot of student films as a freelancer. But from there, just because I specialized in narration, it just kind of naturally led me into people that were like, hey, I've heard your work for film. Do you do podcasts? And at first I was like, oh, not really, but like I'll give it a shot. And from there, just ended up really enjoying kind of falling into the world of podcasts and finding a lot of, business there. And I really liked being effectively my own boss. And, I had been thinking about potentially starting a studio one day when I was still in college, but I was like, there's really nothing stopping me from starting like this kind of freelance business where I work with people on different projects now. So I started my business in January of this year, which in hindsight was a bit of a choice with COVID, but things have actually been going really well. And, a lot of people have been needing help with vocal cleanup and things like that, which I specialize in since they're recording at home. So it's been a little bit of a rough ride since March, but it's been good.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I was wondering, you seem to be doing more audio production these days, but you also wrote on your website that your background as a musician takes you into the realm of audio, how you approach audio production or audio engineering. And that's interesting because our crowd in Music Weeklies, I don't know if you've had a look at our people, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
our group. We are mostly in the business of do it yourself, everything from A to Z. Like
Mm-hmm.
you just write the music and then you have to do everything else as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have a lot to learn from people who are sort of more specialized, maybe. But it's interesting. How did you approach that? Did you move from music into audio production very gradually, or was it just like, okay, now I'm an audio? I don't understand exactly how uni works in the US. I have to
Oh,
stop by
gotcha.
saying that. So
Yeah. So it was originally when I was studying for music and audio production, I wanted to be recording music. That was like my big dream, and writing compositions and being able to record them for like movies or video games. But I actually kind of discovered that having this music background in audio production is, there's kind of like two types of audio producers. There are people that are like very technical and focus on like kind of the tech and computer aspects, and then there are other people that focus on the music aspects. And I found that especially being a musician, it helped train my ear in a way that I think it would have been harder to get trying to teach myself without being a musician. And it just kind of made me very aware of like how to listen to music and even voices, just because I was used to, playing music in like theater and orchestras for various shows. And I think that it gave me kind of this nice blended background of like understanding the technical aspects of audio, but at the same time being able to have trained ears that helped me in a bunch of different projects. If that makes
yeah,
sense.
that does make sense. Actually, I think that's how I experience my own learning curve. That I'm building a lot on the fact that I have gone through ear training
Mm-hmm.
and that it helps with the audio side of things. Although I'm very amateur at both mixing and mastering, and I'm a big fan of isotopes. Here, plug in this thing,
Oh,
and then yeah.
yes.
But yeah, I do understand what you mean, and it makes a lot of sense. So, are there actually a lot of audio engineers that aren't musicians then? Because I don't know this realm.
Yeah, so at least in my experiences when I was in school, you could actually specialize your audio production degree. You could either study like physics or computer science, which was more of the technical aspect, or you could study music or communications. So that would be more of like being a producer or studying like recording music. So I went down the music track, but it's very common for a lot of people to go down more of the technical track. And typically they'll find jobs in like creating like the isotope plugins, for example, or creating the tech that is really important in audio production. Especially if you study physics, it helps a lot with being able to create like speakers and microphones. But yeah, I took some physics classes in college and it was definitely helpful, but I was like, this is not my cup of tea. I'm going to stick with the music and the recording side of things.
Hmm. So do you actually have a recording studio as well, or is it more, do you work from home or do you have a studio space that you go to?
So before COVID started, I would work in the recording studios at my school, and then once I graduated, I kind of worked out deals with local studios where I would basically um, be able to reserve space in the studio at like a discounted rate and like bring people in and use their spaces. So they would get a cut of what I was recording with other people. Unfortunately, just because of COVID, I can't go to the studios anymore. I
Yeah.
recently moved from a apartment which was impossible to record in to a house. So I'm in the process of turning the basement, which is where I am now, into a studio. So got some new monitors and some new equipment. So the next step is really soundproofing because it's a little echoey down here.
Oh, nice. It must be, yeah, I mean, a lot of us work from home, I guess, but it must be nice to have like a proper facility for it in a sense.
Yeah, it's definitely helped because especially when I was in an apartment, you'd be like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna work on mixing for this podcast, and then, the maintenance people would be cutting the grass outside, or your neighbor would be like stomping around upstairs. So, being able to have this bigger space, especially since I can't go to other recording studios right now, has helped a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I just moved into a flat and I have now set up my little vocal filter in the wardrobe in the hallway, but
Mhm.
that's the extent of my home recording studio.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely hard trying to like envision space and be like, okay, where will this sound the best? And it takes some time and patience, but once you get things settled in, it's nice.
Yeah. And do you still work on music as well, or is it mainly the audio side of things?
So I do work on music occasionally. It's a lot of mixing music like for podcasts, definitely, and just making sure like the music's not too loud, the voices aren't too loud, and that they blend well together. I have still been doing some compositions. I do a lot of that more in my free time than professionally, but I actually specialized, well, not specialized, but in school, I really loved like arranging. So sometimes people will reach out to me of like, hey, I really like this song. Can you write like, simple guitar music so I can play it? And I've been doing more of that, which is something that I really enjoy.
Oh, that's actually a really nice side of composition that we maybe don't consider so often because they give
Yeah.
you one melody and you're supposed to make all the other voices in a way.
Yeah, especially when there's no sheet music to go from and you have to do it by ear. It's definitely harder, but it's kind of like a puzzle for me, and I really enjoy it. But kind of arranging work is sort of few and far between. I've been doing some pieces for I'm in like a community marching band, and I've been doing some arrangements for there. But outside of that, not so much.
Yeah, but still, absolutely undervalued side of composition, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Um, and we have some questions that are more on your workflow and how you approach the actual work, the process.
Sure.
So, on a typical project for you, what is your creative process? Whether it be, I guess it depends on what kind of project you're working on, if it's composition or audio production, but
Mhm.
feel free to go through it.
I guess I can talk about both if you'd like, because I think composition, and audio production are pretty different. So I'll do the composition one first, because especially my type of compositions, I like to use a few acoustic instruments and a lot of synths. So to be perfectly honest, when I decide that I want to compose, unless I'm composing for something, like someone specifically says, like, I need a scary soundtrack, or like I need an upbeat soundtrack. Usually I spend like a couple hours just messing around with my synths if I'm just like creating a song from scratch that's not for anything. And when I find a sound that I really like, I make it into a sort of a challenge of like, okay, I love this sound that I just created or that I just found. How can I write an entire song around this? And I have some typical instruments that I like to bring in. Like I like piano or organ and a few synths that I go to pretty regularly. But I like to feature either synths that I've created or sound effects that I've found that I think are cool, and just be like, how can I turn this into a song? So the creative process for composition is a little, I don't know, it's not very set in stone, because if I'm just composing for fun, not having to worry about a deadline or a particular theme, then it's like I'm just gonna mess around and see what comes out, which some of my favorite compositions have been made that way. So yeah, usually I go from finding the sounds I want, and then I'll use a like music notation software to help me write down my melodies, because I record using a keyboard, but I'm not a very good keyboard player. So I find that it's a lot easier to like type in the notes and then just transfer that into my audio workstation, and it'll like basically play it for me, because my keyboard skills are abysmal. So it's a lot easier to just type it in as notes. So yeah, that's basically my composition process. But in terms of audio production, especially because yeah, basically always am working for a client. I have to start with like talking through the vision with the client first, especially if it's a new client, because people have such different tastes in what the type of content that they want to produce, and like it's less of my personal style and more trying to fit into the style of the person that's creating the content. So once I have the discussions with them, I usually start by listening through the audio and making notes of like, okay, this part, it's very echoey, so I'm gonna have to work on that. Or this part is really quiet, so I'm gonna have to work on like reducing noise in the background when I make it louder. And then from there, I usually just go in like a linear way straight through. I don't like to jump around to different spots, because I find that like that kind of confuses me a little bit. So I like to go from like beginning to end and then listen back and go beginning to end. And I usually go through it like 3 or 4 times to make sure that I like what I'm hearing. But yeah, I never jump around. I just go straight through. So yeah, I think that's the processes for both.
Yeah, that's it's good to hear how the pros do it. I mean, I don't know anything about audio engineering and production. Apart from using Isotope. But you were kind of touching on that now. I was wondering, how do you approach working within the confines of a commission in terms of how much do you feel you can bring your own personality to it? Do you make that a feature of what you're selling, or is it are you trying to subdue your own creative sort of explosion, or?
I think there's like kind of a middle ground there. I don't want to kind of butt in and like take over the creative process and be like, well, since I'm editing this, I think that we should do this, this, and this, because that's not my job. My job is to help other people like realize their visions. But I will do suggestions from time to time, especially when it comes to like dialogue editing. I'll say, like, these takes, for example, and I will do some like, I guess it would count as producing, where like I will choose takes to use in the podcast. So I definitely will come up with like lots of notes, but frame them more as like opinion of like, when this person did their lines this way, they did a few different takes, but none of them like really fit the mood of like what's going on in the story. And especially when people are recording separately, sometimes when you line up like this person recorded and then this person recorded a few days later and you put them together, sometimes like their energies don't match. So I will give some suggestions based off of that, but ultimately, it's the choice of the person that's producing and not me. So I will give my creative opinions there. Yeah. And when it comes to sound design, which I do, I definitely put my creativity in a lot. And then if the person likes it, that's great. But we'll go through a couple rounds of notes where they'll say like, okay, maybe like this was very like in your face. Let's tone it down a little bit and make it more subtle. So I would say I get to do the most creative process when it comes to sound designing. But again, I need to find that balance between my personal style and the vision of the show.
Yeah. So do you do a lot of Foley or is it?
It depends. Especially now, just because I'm working at home, this space is not the best for recording. So I have a lot of sound banks that I'll pull from and design from there. But when I was still able to go to studios, I would record sound effects in the studios. And yeah, that's definitely a fun aspect of the job, for sure.
Yeah. Do you have like fixed kit that's your Foley kit? Like a drawer full of
Yeah,
celery or
so I do a lot of horror sound effects. And to be honest, a lot of my Foley sound effects are like fruits and vegetables, especially like melons, because any like gross sound, if you just like get like, I use honeydew and just like rip it with my hands, and it sounds so disgusting, but it's perfect. So
oh,
like, I would say most of my typical Foley kit is like food, unless it's like footsteps or something like that. But usually I use food in like, I'd say like 60% of what I'm designing.
oh, that's so cool. I
Yeah.
guess it's the organic sound in a way. It's very unpredictable and
Yeah. Cause I could try and like replicate like, I don't know. I don't want to get too graphic, but like a bone breaking or something. I could try and replicate that with like some crunchy material or something, but like, I don't know, a piece of celery or like, I don't know, something else that's like equally crunchy, and messing with that, like it sounds really good.
yeah. And do you then morph it totally in the door, or do you put a lot of effects on it and distortion and da da da, or is it more?
I think it would depend on exactly what sound effect I'm using. Usually I'll at least add some effects to like clean up the noise, especially like you don't want to hear my hand like on the object. So
Uh,
I'll do some like noise reduction and things like that, but I try to record in a way that involves like the least amount of editing afterwards, because it's better to have a cleaner recording and lesser editing than like an okay recording and having to do a lot of editing.
yeah, yeah. I guess that's that's something I'm coming to terms with because I'm a singer and I like to try and record myself, but that's hard.
Yeah.
It's difficult, especially when you're at home and you don't have the selection of very classy materials to choose from to do my
Yeah.
acoustic treatment.
Yeah, there's a lot of DIY options out there, but it's hard sometimes.
Oh, it takes so much effort. That's the thing. The
Yeah.
DIY, I mean, okay, you save a lot of money on using, I don't know, home built gobos or whatever, but am I actually going to ever do it? Not sure. But yeah, would you like to talk a little bit about your sources of inspiration for in all your processes?
Oh, sure. I guess I'll do composition first. So what I really enjoyed in college, and I still enjoy now, was creating and using sound effects, and whether that was either for like a film or for a video game. But I don't know. In college, I was originally being trained more classically, which nothing is wrong with that. Like, I do really enjoy writing for orchestra and writing for string instruments, but I felt that it was kind of disingenuous to my personal style, because like I love sound effects and I love audio productions and like creating digital effects. So like writing compositions that were purely for orchestra felt like I was just kind of cutting out this part of sound that I love and that I enjoy. So as I started going through college, I started experiencing or experimenting more with adding sound effects and digital effects to orchestral arrangements. And that was something that I found I guess, comfort in, because I felt like I could pull all of these different elements of sound that I enjoy and put them together instead of just being like, well, I'm writing for string instruments, so no digital effects allowed. So I would say, at least in terms of composition, my inspiration is just things that I like and enjoy, and just trying to like smash them together and see what happens. And sometimes it's a disaster and it sounds really awful, but at least I had a good time creating, and maybe I'll get, a cool idea for sound effects that I could use for a project later, or, some type of inspiration, even if the whole project ends up being not so great. Yeah, in terms of inspiration for my mixing and like audio production, I am really into video games. Like I play so many video games. And I think a lot of my inspiration comes from like narrative games that I've played. So for example, like The Last of Us, both the first one and the second one, is a great example, because like you even in the simplest moments, and the dialogue editing is just so impactful. So like trying to think of ways like in those games that even the simplest things are really impactful. I think that's kind of permeated into my audio production techniques, because like not everything has to be, in your face and loud and kind of like bombastic. Like sometimes even the simplest things, like, I don't know, footsteps or clothing rustles or things like that, are really important and can make a difference. So I think my inspiration there is not just focusing on like big attention grabbing sounds, but also on like the littler things, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, certainly for horror, where you hear
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
little bit of just a shuffle or something can send shivers down your spines.
I will say, in terms of horror inspiration, A Quiet Place was an excellent, excellent example, because so much of that movie was silence or close to it. That, yeah, I don't know, just the way that they were creating the tension in that story when you had to use very minimal sounds was just, it was so good. So it was an
Oh,
excellent example for inspiration.
definitely going to check that out. I haven't seen it.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
The question is, do I dare to see it? Should we do it in daylight? And yeah, okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you want to achieve with your work? And this doesn't have to be just audio production or those things. You also have some engagement within women in music. Was that, or women in audio? Was it?
Yes.
Mm.
So I think in terms of what I want to achieve with my work from like a pure work perspective, what I want to achieve is like helping people being able to tell stories. So especially, I've found this new love of podcasts in terms of like working on them. I use my skills to help create the best version of a story that someone wants to tell others. So, for horror, how can I help to create the best experience for the listener? And I think it's kind of overlooked in a way, because when you just talk with someone face to face, there's, how do I say this? There's not a lot of work that needs to happen. Like sound goes from me directly to you, but when you are telling a story through a podcast, especially when it's being recorded in different places, you as the editor need to find a way to weave all of these pieces together to tell a cohesive story in a way that it seems effortless. So it's just like people in a room having a conversation. So I think my inspiration is honestly to not have my work be noticed, because my goal is to make storytelling so smooth that it sounds and feels natural.
Hmm.
So I think that's my goal in terms of my work. My goal in terms of kind of a wider scope. I am a part of, well, I was a part of Women in Audio when I was in college, and it was a group that was created, I think, when I was in my second year, where we would go and kind of teach younger children about audio as a career and say like, hey, this isn't something, that's only for sound guys, which is like a very typical, way to refer to people, and that women can do this too, and it's an excellent career. And even moving forward, I've started to kind of broaden my scope of people that I work with just because I've been working remotely with my business. And I've had so many people tell me either you're the first female audio engineer that I've ever met, or you're the first Black audio engineer that I've met, or a combination of both. And I think that I, through my work, want to like tell, especially like minorities, like, hey, this space is for us too, and don't feel intimidated to join it, because it's definitely like a very male dominated industry, but there's space for us here. So I've been trying to do that through either organizations that I've joined. I participate in like women's audio mission conferences, and love to attend those. So yeah, just doing presentations and kind of spreading the word of like, hey, there are other people in this industry besides like men.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's one of my bigger goals, is just kind of helping increase diversity in this field.
Yeah, it's a very good one. Do you feel like this is something you still have to carve out, like a space for your role in it, or does it come more easily over time? Or how's the
I
field actually developed in your experience?
So I would say that the field overall has definitely gotten better in the past few years. Like I've noticed more initiatives to try and promote diversity in the industry. But I think there's still a long way to go, especially for women. Like, I used to work doing live sound for concerts where I would, set up microphones and instruments for people. And like, it was very common for people to not believe that I worked at the place that I worked.
Mm.
And, just ask like, oh, are you with the band? Or like, people, they serve food and sometimes they thought I was a waitress. And like, I don't know. I think there's still that stigma of like, it's not like active kind of othering, but it's just kind of, it's so ingrained in our brains that like audio engineers are usually just like, it's like one man that's like, one middle-aged man. So when I would be out and about and, people would see like a younger Black woman, that they would have a hard time believing that I was actually working and not just like a fan or around. So I think that there's a lot of work still to be done in the industry in terms of like seeing minority audio engineers as equals, because there's just such this image in people's brains of what an audio engineer looks like. So
Mm.
I have noticed that things have been getting better, and I've seen a lot more people of color especially trying to enter this industry, but I think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done from like the top down, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess this is in Norway as well, where I'm based. It's quite a homogenous population, even just in music overall. I mean, there are a lot of female musicians, but
Hmm.
we often fall in the same categories, right? The pianist and the songwriter and the
Yeah.
singer. So there is a lot of work to be done all over the place, I think, within the industry, but certainly in your field, where when I think of a recording studio, I have to admit, I think about, white guy,
Hmm.
probably four of them. And I wish it wasn't so. And I hope that
Yeah.
it won't be that in 10 years' time or something. So you're
Yeah,
doing really
though.
important work. Thank you.
Thank you. I was gonna say that's one of the reasons that I wanted to start my own business. And you know, getting out of college, I wasn't necessarily expecting to start a business in a couple years, but I felt that there was this need for like top down change. And I was like, well, why would I go through these traditional channels of like hoping for promotions and hoping to make my way up when I can just start my own studio and just, from the beginning, that those are the goals that I'm trying to promote. And I hope one day to grow to have, more employees instead of just like freelance people that I work with, and kind of promoting that diversity in my studio. So yeah, we'll see as it grows. Hopefully I can do that.
Yeah, we're writing for you. Hopefully, it'll be
Thanks.
a great, long lasting enterprise.
Yeah.
We have a few questions from the community of
Oh,
Music
okay.
Weeklies that have chipped in. And would you like to give us the best advice you have for people who want to break into your field?
Yeah, so I will be honest. I know that I talked about going to college in terms of like my personal training. I think that the best way to get into the industry is just hands-on training because, even in my first year of school, a lot of our training was outside of the studio and it was like, oh, this is what an EQ is, this is what a compressor is, and like sort of the basics of the field, which are important to learn. But when I did a internship when I was in school that was at a live sound venue where I mentioned earlier, I felt like I learned such a tremendous amount from having that hands-on experience with different musicians and different people. So I would say, in terms of entering the industry, try and get hands-on experience as fast as you can, whether that's just recording friends and practicing editing that, or if it's, attending with COVID, it's a little different, but like even attending like workshops, there are workshops, like week-long workshops all over the place that you can attend. And I would say, yeah, just getting that hands-on experience as soon as you can really helps because there's so much that you learn just from listening that can't really be taught, especially through a textbook because you can't hear the textbook.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would say hands-on experience as fast as you can. And I would also say don't break the bank on equipment right out of the gate. A lot of people talk about like, oh, you need like the best equipment, you need the best speakers and the best microphone. And I would say, to be honest, just find some kind of high level beginner equipment to use because to be honest there is some equipment that I have that I was like, oh, I definitely need to have this, and all the professionals have it that I barely use, to be honest. So I would say start out with the basics and see what works for you and then go from there, and don't just buy equipment because other people have the same thing. You have to experiment and find out what's best for you.
Yeah. That gas is a real thing, gear acquisition syndrome.
Yes,
I've had
yes.
it. Definitely. Um, and how do you deal with imposter syndrome and potential burnout?
Well, that is a question that I wish I had an answer to because, to be honest, that's something that I still struggle with from time to time. Um, I would say what has helped me personally is looking back on what I've done in the past because sometimes I'll be like, oh, this thing I'm working on is not working out. Like I don't know, can I pull this off? But when I look back at some of the work that I did in college, the growth has just been so astronomical that it makes me realize like, hey, I've worked hard to get where I am now, and I'm going to keep growing and learning. And it's okay to not know the answer sometimes, but as long as you keep pushing forward and keep trying to learn, that's probably the best thing you can do. And also, I've I would say the other biggest piece of advice that I have is not comparing yourself to other people because everyone's journey, whether it's into this field or the type of music that they create, is different. And trying to compare yourself, like, well, I wish I had the sound of this person, that's like the fastest way to find yourself facing imposter syndrome because your sound is unique, and when you try to force it to fit into the standards of someone else, that's where you start kind of opening yourself up to imposter syndrome for sure.
Yeah, that's a great advice, actually. And have you had faced any potential burnouts, or do you have a good strategy to avoid, working too much overtime or?
I think probably the time that I faced the most burnout was when I was trying to start the business because it was, trying to work on like filing paperwork and doing research about taxes, which
Oh,
I hate. And, trying to do this kind of back end business stuff while also, still editing and, finding spaces to record and things like that. What helped me the most was to start making like a very in depth schedule and also a checklist. There's something really satisfying about like having a checklist and be like, okay, I finished this thing, and like either deleting it if it's virtual or erasing it off of like a board. And it's such a simple thing that I was like, oh, this might help me, but like seeing everything that I need to do kind of laid out before me and being able to prioritize is a lot better than just like having everything in my head and being like, well, I have to do this and this and this. And just writing things down, honestly, kind of helps you slow down and think about what you're doing and whether you're doing too much or whether it's manageable. So I would say, even though it's like such a little step, just being able to write things down helps so much, and it helps you just stay organized and keep you from, I wouldn't say it completely keeps you from burning out, but it helps put things in perspective of what you need to do and how much time you should spend on each thing.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Absolutely. Then we have a few one-liners here, or if you can,
Okay.
one-liners. So this is more composition related, but given the
Okay.
choice, DAW or paper or inside head or on an instrument?
What was the first option?
DAW, digital audio workstation. Maybe I'm saying it
Ah,
wrong.
gotcha.
DAW.
Um, yeah, I would say a combination of DAW or writing it down, but I write it down digitally. I don't use paper anymore.
Okay. What one thing would you like to experiment more with?
Oh, I would say probably recording sound effects on location with crowds, because usually I'm recording things that are like quieter, like, oh, this river or, something like that. But recording with lots of people is actually really hard. So I think I would try and record in busier spaces more.
That's interesting. Which music trend peeves you the most?
Um, oh man, I don't want to like throw any shade on anybody. Um, I would say the one that annoys me the most, and I won't name any artists, but artists that have like a really nice authentic sound when they start out and then try to fit more into pop trends and kind of lose their individual voice. Because sometimes people start out and they sound fantastic, and then just trying to make themselves and comparing themselves to other artists is when it starts not sounding as good to me.
Oh, that took a while for me, to be honest, to try and get out of that mindset of I need to sing like this because everyone in pop does it. It's like, yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
it's
can't do that.
difficult.
Doesn't work. And the last one, music guilty pleasure.
Music guilty pleasure. Oh, I don't know. I have a lot of like music pleasures, but I'm not sure which one of them would be guilty. Um, oh, geez, this is a hard one.
Well, I guess you're not very judgmental. That's great.
I would say a guilty pleasure of mine is finding, this is kind of weird, but like especially on SoundCloud, finding people that like have just started out and like their mixing might not be amazing, or like some of their lyrics, but then like listening to their more recent songs and hearing how they've grown. Like, I don't know if that's a guilty pleasure, but that's something that's a little less common. It's really interesting just seeing how people change, even though over the course of like a year or so.
Yeah, that's something we get to see a lot in music weeklies. Actually, we have people tend to follow us for a while and submit over the course of quite a long time, and you can really see people develop, and that's really nice.
Yeah, I think that's great too. Like I mentioned earlier with the imposter syndrome, just having records of the work that you've done, even if it's just like a little few bar long melody, it's so interesting just seeing your growth as a composer and having, those records. That's why I don't really write on paper anymore, because I would lose them and just be
Yeah,
like, wow, this song had potential and I have no clue where it went. So,
yeah,
yeah.
good point. Yeah, well, this was what I had. Well, have you got anything you would like to add? Have you got some works you want to point us to, or?
Yeah, in terms of works that I'm working on now, I'm working on Dark Dice, which is a horror a fantasy podcast based on Dungeons and Dragons, and that's definitely a fun one to work on. What else have I been working on? A lot of fantasy and horror podcasts for sure. Um, but yeah, I would say in terms of things to look forward to, I do have a podcast. I can't talk about it, but it'll be coming out soon that is music related. And I would definitely say that that one would be one to look forward to once it comes out.
Okay, we'll keep our eyes and ears peeled. Well, thank you so much for taking part. We'll link to. Do you have like a certain piece you would like us to link us to in the description of the interview? Then we will.
Yeah, I would say in terms of my music, one of my favorites is Shore, which is on my SoundCloud. And it's a piece that it was one of the first pieces that I did that blended together sound effects and digital sounds and acoustic sounds. So I would say, yeah, that's definitely a good one to check out.
Okay, we'll put a link up for that one. And thank you so much for taking part. And to all the listeners and viewers, thank you so much for staying with us until this point. And we'll see you next time.